Hello and welcome back to Stu Structures. We're here today to do some weathering on a freight car for the Down and Dirty weathering contest, so stay tuned. So we're going to do some weathering like I explained for the Down and Dirty weather contest. My name is Mark Stewart here at Stu Structures. I'm your favorite Pharaoh equestrianologist. A friend of mine kind of coined that term. I brought it up online. Some people said, well, say that and explain it. So Pharaoh equestrianologist. It's a person that studies the iron horse. Pharaoh, iron, equestrian, horse, and ologist, person that studies, I guess. But anyway, a Pharaoh equestrianologist. So if you're here watching me, you have similar interests, so you must be one too. So anyway, we're going to get started on weathering this first freight car for the contest. So let's just jump right into it.
The first one I'm going to work on is this PS2. This was a Pullman standard car, as I stated in my previous video. I'm going to remove the trucks here to begin with. That makes the car easier to work with, and it's better if you take the wheel sets and everything out of the truck so you can actually weather the trucks as well. You just need to be really careful to keep clean the little divots that the axle points set back into in the truck. And also you need to, once you get them apart, go ahead and clean everything really well with isopropyl alcohol. I use these nitrite gloves when I handle all my parts for painting or doing anything. One of the biggest problems that people have when they do this type of thing is the oils in their fingers get on the cars, and it stops a good adhesion between any of the powders or paints or anything that you put on the car. So always wash everything before you do it. Here I'm just adding a grimy black base of paint to all the parts of the wheel sets here. I've been around in the hobby for a long time, and I still have some of these old Floquil paints. I wish they were still available in the market. They're my favorite paints of all time, but I still have some older bottles that I'm clinging on to that are maintaining life really well. But here I'm just putting a basic black coat on all of them. Now I'm just using these artist pastels for my chalks for this whole project. Here you see I've just taken the sticks out and used an X-Acto knife, scraping them down onto some slick paper. And this little box I got was just a present for Christmas, and it worked out to be a nice little box to put all these pastels in. And if you don't have the right colors, you can always mix the powders once you get them ground up. And here I mixed a couple different colors to kind of get the tone of rust that I wanted for the edges of the wheels. There's several different things that happen on the wheels depending on how old they are. Any of the moving parts or anywhere where different metals are touching each other, that's where the highest rates of oxidation would be. Here I'm doing the wheel sets as well. I don't really look under the cars that much, but I try to weather the whole thing as a unit just to make sure everything has a nice look to it. In some places where there's a lot of movement against the metal, you'll actually get some shiny metal edges here and there. So we'll take a pencil and just edge a few things here and there. I did a little bit on the springs and a little bit on a couple of the edges of the trucks that might have rubbed against things to kind of give it that little bit of a fresh metal here and there. That it just happens naturally on trucks when they're in use. And then some of it got a little bit bright for me, so I went back and just added a little bit of chalks on top of that. And then the ends of the axles, they were pretty clean. I didn't get much on them, but I just came back with a knife. These are metal axles in these wheel sets, so just scraping off what powder and paint or whatever did get into them. I want them to roll really freely when I get them back in the trucks and put them together. One thing I try is a lot of cheap paints. I did buy this Valspar Clear Coat Flat. I don't recommend it, so it might be something everybody wants to avoid. To begin with, I started with the top of the car. I started lightening up all the lettering and stuff like that, I used my metal distress brush. I recommend you dragging it. Don't scratch too hard with this because you'll get a lot of heavy gouges. I just couldn't find my fiberglass pen at the time I started this, so I'm working with this, but I'm just dragging down, and it seems to have an okay effect. It really lightened up the lettering and everything really well to kind of give it an aged look. Then I'm going back over with this white wash just to kind of dull everything and give it kind of an oxidized look. Paint over time with the sun beating on it and the weather and the elements do tend to lighten the paint and give it kind of a powdery oxidation look. So a white wash on top of everything is a good place to start, just to kind of get that feeling like it's aged a little, and then we can go a little deep into it from there. And then I'm going to do an ink wash. I like to make some of the details pop a little bit. I did use alcohol with both of these washes. I wanted to get a good adherence to the paint, so I wanted to soften up the paint as I was doing the washes. So I added a little bit of alcohol to both of these washes with a little Windex just to give it a good flow on the surface. But anyway, this black coming back over the white just falls into all the crevices and the edges and makes all the detail pop a whole lot more than it did before I started to wash. So I always like following through with this method. You can see here I'm also going into the walkway up on top. It's a solid walkway. It's not a see-through the way some of the nice metal etched walkways are. So putting the black on there goes down into all the crevices and gives it a really deeper look, and looks like a whole lot better, like more of a walkway would. We'll continue on with doing some other work on this, which will make it pop a little bit. But you can see just a basic first run of these two washes did do some to it. It took away the shininess and the plastic look. There's a lot more to go into from here. I'm going to start with these two different siennas, a burnt sienna and a raw sienna. I like using raw umber as well, but these two I just put a dab of paint on a little palette and got some water and started doing some washes with them as well. Trying to hit areas with the lighter umber where rust would have washed and ran and came down from heavier rust. The darker burnt sienna is more for the heavier rust areas. Around the hatches gets a lot of abuse, so I'd use a lot of the darker colors around there. A lot of times when they're filling these cars with the various materials, a lot of it will run down from the hatches onto the sides. Some of the chemicals and various things they carry in these cars, powders and stuff, are very corrosive. So a lot of times this edge where the top meets the sides will have some serious corrosion on it, which will drag on down onto the sides of the car. So I always put this on there and then drag it down the sides of the car as well, which helps give it that natural look as things would weather. Here you can see I'm coming back with powders then after the washes have dried a little bit. I'm just adding the darker, heavier rust into some of the areas where the washes would have ran from. This also helps give me a heavier rust around the hatches and stuff that would have been really corroded and beaten up a little more. Also in the walkways, with people walking on them to open the hatches and stuff during use, the walkways get most of the paint scuffed off of them, so they get some fair rust down in all the grates on tops as well. Then coming back with a little black powder and just kind of highlighting all that a little bit and making some of those details pop the same way we did when we did the washes as well earlier. Making sure here that you want to make sure you get up underneath the walkway as well. If you're looking at this car from the side, a lot of times you can see up underneath the edge and you don't want that bright gray showing. So, and using this pencil, once again, when the guys are walking up the ladders or on the hatchways, a lot of times the front edges of these steps will have a little bare metal, so I'm using the pencil technique again on these ladders and a little on the walkways on top as well. I'm going to start with the same process as on the bottom. First I'm doing a whitewash. I probably didn't need to really do this on the bottom. I probably could have went to the darks and started off from there, but I went ahead and did it just to cut down on the glare of the plastics and soften the paint underneath a little bit, because I did use some alcohol in it. Then I got some dark ink wash and I put it in an airbrush. It's just awkward to get down into some of these crevices in this. I thought the airbrush would hit the bottom of it a little bit better. It did get a little beading on it, so obviously I didn't get it as clean as I wanted to. So I came back with a brush and worked with a wash while this was still wet, and kind of went ahead and took care of the beading. I probably should have washed it a little better. The top I did, but the bottom I didn't wash as well as I should have, I guess. So I'm coming back with a couple different various washes and starting on some powders and getting everything all worked in here. I ended up having to do several layers on the bottom, but starting off with the brown and the rust colors, working them into areas that would have been a higher rate of rust in the cars, and coming back with some black then and working it in as well. Kind of did this a little awkward when I went through this whole process. I probably should have done more of the sienna washes before I went into the powders, but I wanted to play with this. Sometimes a lot of things are trial and error, and you know, it wasn't so bad actually. So I continued on here doing all the powders, and was getting a pretty good technique out of it actually. Fairly happy with the way it was going, but yeah, just a lot of this is trial and error. You just have to figure out what works for you and roll with it, and sometimes if it doesn't work, you start over. You just take stuff off and put it on. I didn't have to go to that extent, but just continuing to work with it here, and going through the black and the browns, a little bit of orange mixed with the browns to give me some of the brighter rust colors. Anyway, it's starting to work out pretty good at this point here. So I continued on. I ended up doing multiple layers on this. Every time I got to the point where I thought, well, I'm done with that one, and then look at it and, well, no, it needs to be a little more. One thing I was unhappy with was the fact that some of the rust, the rust itself areas didn't look too bad, but there was just not enough area where the rust would have, you know, gotten wet and stained areas around it. So I did do a little bit of a wash at the very end to kind of soften some of those areas out a little bit. But this end process, I'm pretty happy with the car overall. With everything back together, I think when it goes by, it will be very nice looking on the track. So I'm pleased with it. We'll see how we do on the next one.
Okay, so there we have the first of our two cars finished. We'll get started into the second car. I appreciate you coming back and watching my channel, and we'll get right into this next build of the Down and Dirty Weather Contest. So stay tuned in the next week for the next car. Thanks again. Go ahead and give me some comments at the bottom if you want to. I'm sure somebody out there has probably better techniques that you can send my way. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more with buildings and stuff coming your way after this contest is done. So stay tuned for all that. Like and share. Like I said before, there's a lot of people out there that doesn't know this stuff exists out here. There's a lot of good knowledge people pass around through all this. So go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell down there, and you'll be notified when new content comes out. And until then, this is your favorite Pharaoh equestrianologist signing off. Happy model railroading.